Hey, everyone, remember like cruising around with the radio on full blast, singing along to Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, or maybe the Big Bopper?
Yeah.
Their music, just had this energy,
Yeah.
this like youthful spirit. It felt unstoppable.
And then on one freezing February night in 1959, it all came to a tragic end.
You guys have asked us to take a deep dive into the day the music died.
Yeah,
And we've got some really fascinating sources to work with for this one.
absolutely.
We've got these audio recordings of news reports from that day,
Wow.
giving us like this raw firsthand account of how the news unfolded.
Yep.
And we'll also be drawing from a recent history podcast that really delves into the context and the aftermath of this event.
It's so crucial to understand the world that these musicians were living in. Rock and roll was still pretty new in 1959.
Right.
And these guys were at the forefront of a cultural shift. This movement that was like challenging norms, electrifying young audiences.
Yeah. So let's start by setting the scene. Imagine the Winter Dance Party Tour. This grueling schedule of shows across the Midwest. In the dead of winter.
Oh, yeah.
The archival audio paints this picture of freezing buses, exhausted musicians, even illness spreading through the group.
So for Buddy Holly, who was always driven and ambitious, the tour conditions were becoming increasingly frustrating.
Yeah.
He was already a star, with
Right.
hits like That'll Be the Day and Peggy Sue under his belt.
Uh-huh.
But he wasn't content to just ride the waves. He wanted more creative control.
Right.
And he was eager to explore new sounds.
His early days with Decca Records, his first label,
Right.
were a real struggle.
Oh, yeah.
They tried to fit him into this mold that just didn't suit his style.
Totally. And this is where we really see his determination come through.
Yeah.
He eventually breaks away from Decca, forms his own band, The Crickets. Hence a new label that gives him more creative freedom. That move allowed him to really develop his signature sound, the one that would influence so many artists to come.
And speaking of influence, the podcast mentions that Buddy actually opened for Elvis Presley back in '55. Can you imagine being a young musician in the audience for that show?
Yeah.
Seeing Elvis, who was already this phenomenon,
Right.
sharing the stage
Yeah.
with this up-and-coming talent from Lubbock, Texas.
It's a glimpse into the energy of that era, the
Yeah.
raw talent that was emerging. And for
Yeah.
Buddy Holly, it must have been an incredible experience, both inspiring and perhaps a bit intimidating.
Yeah.
To share the stage with someone like Elvis speaks volumes about his potential, even at that early stage.
He wasn't an instant success by any means,
Mm-hmm.
but his career was on this meteoric rise.
Oh, yeah.
He was playing on The Ed Sullivan Show,
Wow.
touring internationally.
Right.
And just months before the crash, he married Maria Elena Santiago.
It adds a layer of tragedy to the story, knowing how much he had going for him, both personally and professionally.
Oh.
He was a young man in love, starting a family, and his music was reaching new heights.
Now let's get back to that fateful night in Clear Lake, Iowa. They were playing at the Surf Ballroom, and the energy must have been incredible. Can you picture it? Fans braving the freezing cold to see these rock and roll stars.
But behind the scenes, the reality of the tour was taking its toll. The constant travel, the cramped buses, it was wearing everyone down.
Yeah.
And Buddy, being the practical one, started looking for a way to make the journey to the next stop a bit more bearable.
That's when he decided to charter a plane to get to their next gig in Minnesota. A way to escape the bus, get some rest, and maybe even avoid getting any sicker.
Right.
Seemed like a simple enough decision.
A decision that would have unimaginable consequences.
And here's where fate takes a chilling turn. The plane only had 3 passenger seats,
Oh, wow.
and there was some last-minute shuffling. Waylon Jennings, Buddy's bass player, originally had a seat,
Right,
but gave it up to J.P. Richardson, the Big Bopper, who wasn't feeling well.
right.
Then there was a coin toss for the last seat between Tommy Allsup, Buddy's guitarist,
Yeah.
and Richie Valens.
And as we all know, Richie won that toss, securing his place on the plane. Just a simple coin toss, right? And everything changes.
And the sources mention this moment that must have haunted Waylon Jennings for the rest of his life before they boarded. He jokingly told Buddy, "I hope your old plane crashes."
Oh, wow.
It was meant in jest, of course,
Right.
but given what happened, it's chilling.
Imagine carrying the weight of those words, knowing that what was intended as harmless banter became tragically prophetic.
Yeah.
It's a heartbreaking reminder of the power of words and the unpredictable nature of life.
So around 1 a.m. on that snowy February morning, the plane took off with Buddy Ritchie, the Big Bopper, and the young pilot Roger Peterson at the controls.
Okay.
They were headed for Fargo, North Dakota, but they never made it.
The archival audio from the news reports paints this really stark and somber picture of the aftermath. The plane crashed in a remote cornfield just a few miles from the airport.
It's difficult to listen to those reports. Hearing the shock and disbelief in the voices of the reporters as they relay the news, the sheriff who responded to the scene described the wreckage as devastating, with the passengers likely thrown from the plane on impact.
The impact on the music world was immediate and profound. These weren't just rising stars, they were innovators, pushing the boundaries of rock and roll. And to have them all taken so suddenly, it sent shockwaves through the industry and left a void that would be deeply felt.
It's hard to overstate Buddy Holly's influence. Even though his career was tragically cut short at the age of 22, he wasn't afraid to experiment. To blend country and Western influences with this rockabilly edge. He wrote his own songs, played his own instruments, and his music had this raw energy that resonated with a generation.
He was a pioneer in so many ways. He and the Crickets were one of the first rock bands to use a 2-guitar, bass, and drums lineup.
Oh, wow.
A combination that would become the standard for rock bands in the years that followed.
And his songwriting was incredibly innovative. He wasn't afraid to write about teenage angst, heartbreak, the joys and frustrations of young love. His lyrics were simple but powerful, and his melodies were catchy and memorable.
Absolutely.
He paved the way for countless artists who came after him. And his influence can still be heard in music today.
Think about the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan. They have all cited Buddy Holly as a major influence. His music helped shape the sound of the British invasion and influenced generations of songwriters and musicians.
And the tragedy of his death, along with Ritchie Valens and the Big Bopper, added to his mystique. It created this sense of unfulfilled potential, the lingering question of what he might have accomplished if he had lived.
It's important to remember that Ritchie Valens, at just 17 years old, was already making his mark on the music world. His hit La Bamba was this groundbreaking fusion of rock and roll with traditional Mexican folk music. He was one of the first Latinx artists to achieve mainstream success in the U.S., breaking down barriers, paving the way for future generations of Latinx musicians.
And J.P. Richardson, the Big Bopper, was known for his larger-than-life personality and his booming voice. His novelty song Chantilly Lace was a huge hit. And he was a popular radio DJ in Texas. He brought this sense of fun and humor to rock and roll. And his loss was deeply felt by his fans and fellow musicians.
The investigation into the crash revealed that the pilot, Roger Peterson, was inexperienced. And lacked a crucial certification for instrument-only flying.
I was wondering what that meant, instrument-only flying. The podcast explains that this certification allows a pilot to navigate solely by relying on instruments when visibility is poor. Like in a snowstorm.
Exactly. And the weather that night was treacherous. Snow, low visibility, strong winds. The investigation concluded that the combination of the pilot's inexperience and the challenging weather conditions likely led to spatial disorientation and ultimately the crash. It was a tragedy that could have been avoided.
It's hard not to feel a sense of what if, isn't it? What if they'd taken the bus that night? What if the pilot had been more experienced? What if the weather had been clear?
Those questions are part of what keeps this story alive, I think. It's a reminder of how fragile life is and how quickly circumstances can change.
But amidst the tragedy, there's also the enduring legacy of their music.
Absolutely.
And while we mourn their loss, it's important to celebrate the impact they had on music and culture.
Absolutely. And perhaps the most powerful testament to their lasting impact is the way their story has been woven into music history itself. 12 years after the crash, singer-songwriter Don McLean released American Pie.
You mean the song with the iconic lyric, "The Day the Music Died"? I've always loved that song. But I didn't realize it was specifically about the plane crash until I was much older.
American Pie became this cultural phenomenon, reaching #1 on the charts and solidifying the event in the public consciousness as The Day the Music Died. The song is full of symbolism and allegory. But it's clear that McLean was grappling with the loss of these young musicians and the sense of innocence that their deaths represented.
It's amazing how a single song can capture the emotions of a generation and create this lasting tribute to those who were lost. American Pie isn't just a catchy tune. It's a historical marker. A reminder of a pivotal moment in music history. And it keeps the memory of Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper alive for new generations of listeners. Makes you wonder what the music world would look like today if things had been different that night.
It's one of those unanswerable questions, isn't it?
Yeah.
What if Buddy Holly, with all his talent and ambition, had lived a full life? How would his music have evolved? Would he have continued to push the boundaries of rock and roll, or would he have ventured into new genres altogether?
He was only 22, just scratching the surface of his potential.
And Richie Valens, just imagine the impact he could have had. He was blending rock with traditional Mexican music, a true innovator who was breaking down cultural barriers at such a young age. He could have been a major force in bringing Latinx music to a wider audience.
And let's not forget the Big Bopper. He brought a sense of fun and humor to rock and roll, this larger-than-life personality that connected with audiences. Who knows what other iconic characters he might have created, what other memorable songs he might have written.
Their deaths were a tremendous loss. But it's inspiring to see how their legacy lives on. Their music continues to be played and enjoyed by people all over the world. New generations discover their songs, and established artists continue to cite them as influences.
It's a testament to the power of music, its ability to transcend time and connect with people on a deep emotional level.
And it's a reminder that even in the face of tragedy, creativity can endure. The stories of Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper continue to fascinate and inspire. They remind us of the power of dreams, the importance of pursuing our passions, and the fragile beauty of life.
So for those of you listening, if you haven't revisited their music lately, I encourage you to do so. Listen to the innovative sounds of Buddy Holly, the groundbreaking fusion of Richie Valens, the infectious energy of the Big Bopper.
And as you listen, think about the context we've discussed today, the world they lived in, the challenges they faced, the impact they had. And perhaps you'll hear their music with a new appreciation, a deeper understanding of the legacy they left behind.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into The Day the Music Died. It's a story that continues to resonate, reminding us of the power of music, the fragility of life, and the enduring legacy of those who dare to dream big.
And who knows, maybe somewhere out there in a parallel universe, the music never died. Maybe Buddy Ritchie and the Big Bopper are still performing, their music evolving and inspiring generations. It's a thought-provoking image, and perhaps a comforting one. A reminder that the power of music and memory can transcend even the most tragic of circumstances.